Get out of my house.
She screamed. The little girl didn't cry. She didn't run. She just looked up with those enormous brown eyes and clutched the torn edge of her mother's apron.
The maid, her mother, froze in absolute terror.
Every single person in that hallway fell into complete silence.
Then came the sound of slow, heavy footsteps descending from the top of the grand staircase. The billionaire was coming down. He had heard every word.
And what unfolded in the moments that followed would change the lives of everyone in that house forever. Hey everyone, welcome back.
If you're new here, I'm so glad you found this channel.
Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing all your locations come in.
And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now, because here we share stories that truly touch the heart.
Stay with me until the very end of today's story.
I promise the final twist is one I didn't see coming myself, and it will change how you feel about everything you've heard. All right, let's begin. Some houses look like paradise from the outside, but the people living inside know the real story. The Blackwood estate sat at the end of a long, winding private road, surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges and iron gates that never seemed to open fully. From the street it looked like something out of a dreamstone walls. A fountain in the circular driveway, floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the evening light and scattered it like gold across the gardens. Inside, the air smelled of fresh flowers and expensive cologne.
But somewhere in the back of that grand mansion, in a small, warm kitchen that few important visitors ever entered, a woman named Elena hummed softly to herself as she folded laundry. Elena had worked at the Blackwood estate for years. Years of rising before the sun, polishing floors that others walked across without a second glance, being invisible in a house full of people.
She never complained, not once.
Because every single thing she did for one reason. Her daughter, Mia. Mia was still so young, a curious little girl with a laugh that could fill the kitchen with warmth. She spent her days tucked quietly in the corner of whatever room Elena was working in, sitting on a small folded blanket, playing with a well-loved stuffed rabbit she had named Bun.
Watching her mother with wide, wondering eyes, Elena had no other choice. She had no family nearby, no one else to watch Mia, and Julian Blackwood, the man who owned the estate, had always been quietly understanding about it. He never complained about seeing Mia in the halls. Sometimes when he passed through the kitchen, he would pause and glance at her with something soft in his expression, something almost like recognition.
Elena had noticed that, but she never asked.
You don't ask questions like that when you need the job to survive. And everything had been manageable, careful, quiet until recently, when Victoria arrived.
Victoria Lang was stunning in the way that only people who know they are stunning. And dark blonde hair, sharp eyes, a smile that could light up a room or cut through it, depending on her mood.
She had swept into the Blackwood estate like a sudden change in the weather.
Before long, she had moved in.
Soon after, she was wearing the ring. The staff had learned quickly that Victoria had opinions about everything: the flower arrangements,
the menu, the temperature of the rooms, the way the towels were folded. But her strongest opinion, the one she made clear almost immediately, was about Mia. Why is there a child running around this house?
She had asked one evening, barely looking up from her phone.
Elena had been standing right there, hearing every word. She's quiet, the estate manager had offered carefully.
She never causes any trouble. That's not the point, Victoria had said. This is not a daycare. Elena had lowered her eyes and said nothing. She was good at saying nothing. Have you ever had to stay quiet about something that hurt you deeply just to protect something you loved even more? If you have, you already understand Elena better than any words I could give you. But something was about to happen that even her silence could not protect against. Because that morning, Victoria came downstairs earlier than usual, and Mia was in the wrong place at the wrong time. What happened in that hallway lasted only moments, but it would echo through the house for the rest of their lives. It started so simply. Mia had woken early. She had padded out of the kitchen in her little socks, the ones with the small ducks on the ankles, and wandered into the main hallway, the way toddlers do when the world is still quiet.
and they feel safe exploring it. She had found something on the floor near the base of the grand staircase, a shiny gold button, probably fallen from a jacket or coat. To a small child, it was a treasure.
She crouched down, her tiny fingers closing carefully around it,
her face lighting up with the kind of pure joy that only very young children can feel over something the rest of the world would throw away. She stood up,
turned around, and walked directly into Victoria's path. Victoria had been coming down the staircase in a silk robe, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She stopped a few steps from the bottom. She looked down at Mia.
Mia looked up at her. For a moment, nothing happened.
Then Mia did what young children do when they find something wonderful and want to share it. She held the button up toward Victoria with both hands, her face open and completely trusting. "Pretty," Mia said softly. Something flickered across Victoria's face, something that might have been softness if it had been given a single second longer to grow.
But it didn't get that second. "Where is your mother?"
Victoria said sharply. Not taking the button, Mia allowed her hand slowly. "Where is your mother?" Victoria said again, her voice climbing. Mia's bottom lip began to tremble. And that was the moment Elena came rushing around the corner from the kitchen, apron still in her hands, eyes wide. "Miss Lang, I'm so sorry," she said, breathless.
She wandered out. I only turned my back for a moment. "This is exactly what I have been talking about." Victoria's voice had gone very cold, very controlled.
"This child has no business being in the main areas of this house. I understand."
"I'll take her back right away." "No," Victoria set her coffee cup down on the hallway table with a sharp click. She turned fully to face both of them.
Her eyes moved from Elena to Mia and back again.
"I am done having this conversation over and over.
This is my home. I did not agree to share it with—" She paused, looked at Mia again, and then said it. "Get out of my house." Her voice cracked through the hallway like something breaking.
Mia flinched so hard she dropped the button. It clattered against the marble floor and rolled into the silence. Elena stepped forward instantly, wrapping both arms around Mia, pulling her small body close, her own face pale and trembling.
"Please," she whispered. "She's just a little girl. I don't care how old she is." Victoria's voice was still ice.
"Pack your things, both of you. I want you out by tonight." The word tonight landed like a stone in still water. Elena's arms tightened around Mia.
Mia buried her face in her mother's neck and didn't make a sound.
She had stopped crying.
She had gone very, very still, the way small children go still when they sense something they don't have words for yet. The button sat abandoned on the floor between them. Nobody moved.
And then from somewhere above them came footsteps, low and hurried at first, but growing louder.
The footsteps of a man who had been at the top of that staircase long enough to have heard everything. Can you imagine what Elena was feeling in that moment? Standing there holding her child, her heart breaking, with everything she had built for years suddenly crumbling in front of her. What would you have done? Nobody in that hallway was ready for what came down those stairs. Least of all, Victoria. Julian Blackwood had been called many things. Driven, brilliant, unreachable, the kind of man who had built an empire before most people his age even figured out what they wanted. He was not the warmest person in any room he walked into.
He knew that about himself, but he had one quality that very few people who wrote about him ever noticed. He paid attention.
He noticed things, small things, quiet things, the things that happened in the corners of rooms while everyone else was watching the center. He had noticed Elena for years.
Not in any complicated way, simply. He had noticed her.
The way she worked, the quiet dignity of it, the fact that she never asked for anything extra, never complained, never made herself a problem for anyone. And he had noticed Mia those enormous dark eyes, the stuffed rabbit named Bun, the way she sat so carefully on her little blanket and never touched anything she wasn't supposed to. The way she sometimes looked up when he passed and gave him a small, uncertain smile, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to smile at him, but couldn't quite stop herself. He had always smiled back. He had never told anyone that. He came down the staircase now without rushing, without raising his voice.
His expression was completely unreadable. Victoria turned when she heard him. Her posture shifted, the sharp angles of her anger softening just slightly into something more careful. "Julian," she said.
I heard," he said quietly. 2 words, that was all. But the way he said them made everyone in the hallway go absolutely still. He reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped onto the marble floor. He walked past Victoria. He walked directly toward Elena and Mia. He crouched down right there on the marble floor of his own grand hallway. One of the most powerful men in the country crouched down to the level of a small child. Mia peeked out from her mother's neck. "Hey," Julian said gently. "You dropped something." He picked up the gold button from the floor.
He held it out to Mia. Mia stared at him for a long moment.
Then, very slowly, she reached out and took it from his hand.
Her tiny fingers wrapped around it carefully. "Pretty," she whispered. "Yeah," he said.
"It is." He stood up slowly and turned to face Victoria. The silence in that hallway had weighed to it now heavy and real. "Elena and Mia are not going anywhere," he said.
His voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it.
Something firm and immovable, like the foundation under all that marble. Victoria's eyes widened. "Julian, they are not going anywhere," he said again. "Tonight or any night." Victoria stared at him. Her jaw tightened.
"So you're choosing a maid and her child over your own fear and eat." Something moved across Julian's face, then something complicated and old, like a door opening onto a room nobody had been in for a very long time. "I need you to go upstairs," he said quietly.
"I need to speak with Elena alone. Here is the part nobody in that hallway saw coming." What Julian said to Elena next, in that empty hallway, his voice low, hands clasped in front of him, was not what anyone expected. It was not a speech about kindness, not a promise about job security. It was a question that made Elena go completely still.
And it started with 4 words she had never expected to hear from his lips. "Why didn't you tell me?"
Elena's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes filled with tears. "Tell you what?" she whispered, but the way she said it, the way her voice shook, the way her arms pulled Mia even tighter, made it clear she knew exactly what he meant. "Did you feel that?"
"Something is being revealed here slowly, quietly, and it is going to change everything you think you know about this story. Stay with me." The secret Elena had been carrying for so long was about to come apart at the seams.
And neither of them was ready for what it would cost. Years earlier, before Elena worked in this house,
Before the iron gates, before the marble floors, before the folded aprons and the silent mornings, there had been a different life.
a brief one, a quiet one, a life that lasted only a few months before the world pulled the 2 people in it in completely different directions. Julian had been younger then,
Still building his empire, still working long days,
still eating alone in empty offices, still searching for something he couldn't name.
Elena had been working as a catering server at events she could never afford to attend, making careful efforts to build a life from scratch after her own family had fallen apart.
They had met at a charity gala, not in any dramatic way. They had met in a corridor behind the main hall,
Both hiding from the crowd for different reasons. They had talked for hours.
really talked.
The kind of talking that doesn't happen at galas. The kind that only happens when 2 people accidentally stumble into honesty together. They had seen each other a few more times after that.
And then Julian's company had taken of meetings, investors, travel, pressure from every direction. And Elena had discovered she was pregnant.
She had tried to reach him, again and again.
The calls had gone to an assistant. The messages had disappeared into the machinery of a life that was moving too fast for anything quiet to survive inside it.
She had told herself he knew.
She had told herself he had chosen not to respond. She had been wrong. He had never received a single message.
She found out much later, too late.
She thought the assistant had been let go for screening personal calls without authorization, that Julian had never known anyone was trying to reach him.
But by then, Mia was already a toddler. By then, Elena had already built a wall around herself and her daughter's small, solid, necessary, and she didn't know how to take it apart. When she had answered the job posting for the Blackwood estate, She had not known it was his house. She had found out on the first day, and she had made a decision, a desperate, terrified, exhausted decision to say nothing, to just do her job, to protect Mia, to survive. She had watched him for years.
She had watched him from the edges of rooms in the quiet moments, wondering, always wondering.
And she had told herself, he is better of not knowing. Mia is better of this way.
This is the right choice. But now he was standing in front of her, and he had figured it out. Not from anything she had said, not from any document or message.
He had figured it out because of Mia's eyes. She has my mother's eyes, he said quietly. His voice cracked slightly on the last word.
Just slightly. I noticed it months ago. I didn't let myself believe it, but I've been looking at those eyes my whole life. Elena was crying now, silently, tears running straight down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered.
I tried to reach you. I thought I know, he said.
I know what you thought. He looked down at Mia, who had fallen asleep in Elena's arms, exhausted from the morning's fear. Her small fingers still curled around the gold button. She's mine, he said.
It wasn't a question. Elena closed her eyes.
Yes, she said. She's yours. The hallway was completely silent. Somewhere far away upstairs, a door closed. Neither of them moved for a long time. There are moments in life that rewrite everything that came before them. Not loudly, not dramatically, as quietly, completely. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where one single realization changed the entire shape of your past?
What happened in the days that followed would test every person in that house and reveal who they truly were. Victoria came downstairs later that day.
She was dressed properly now, hair done, composed a version of herself. She showed the world when she needed to be formidable.
She found Julian in his study.
He was sitting at his desk, but not working, just sitting.
The way people sit when their mind is somewhere their body can't follow. Tell me it isn't true, she said from the doorway. He looked up at her.
She read the answer in his face before he said a single word. Julian.
Tell me that woman's child is not yours. The silence was long enough to be its own answer. Victoria laughed a short, sharp, disbelieving sound all this time. She worked in this house, and you had no idea. Neither did I know she was trying to reach me, he said.
I was never told, and you believe her?
Yes, just like that. I've looked at Mia's face for months, he said quietly. I believe her. Victoria pressed her lips together.
Something moved through her face, and for just a moment, underneath all the composure and all the armor, there was something that looked almost like grief, because here was the part of Victoria that the morning's anger had hidden.
She had wanted children of her own desperately for years. She had found out some time earlier, quietly, privately, in a doctor's office she had never told Julian about, that it might not be possible for her. She had been carrying that alone. She had looked at Mia and seen something she could not name and could not face.
And instead of softening, she had hardened. I can't do this, she said finally.
Her voice was different now, quieter, more real. I can't live in a house with his child and her mother and pretend that's a normal life. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. Julian said. Then what are you asking?
He was quiet for a moment. I'm asking you to be honest with me, he said, about all of it.
Because I think there's something you haven't told me either. Victoria stiffened. She looked at him for a long time, and then she sat down. And she told him about the doctor's office.
And Julian, who had spent the morning discovering he was already a father,
sat and listened to his fiancée tell him she had been terrified for some time that she would never become one. By the end of it, they were both completely undone. Not angry, not at war, just human, broken open.
Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are not evil. They are just people who are carrying something too heavy in silence for too long. Have you ever been angry at someone and then discovered the grief they were hiding? What did that do to your anger? Nobody expected the ending that came. Not Elena, not Victoria, and least of all Julian. In the weeks that followed, the Blackwood estate was quieter than it had ever been. Victoria had moved out not in a dramatic storm of backs and accusations, but slowly, thoughtfully. packing her things across several days while she and Julian talked in long,
honest conversations that they had somehow never managed before all of this happened.
There were tears.
There were apologies given and received.
There was the careful, painful work of two people realizing that they had loved each other, but had stopped actually seeing each other somewhere along the way when she left. She hugged Elena. It lasted only a second, and it was stiff and uncertain and imperfect. But she did it, and as she was walking out the door, she stopped. She turned back to Mia, who was standing in the hallway in her duck socks, clutching Bun, watching with wide, curious eyes. Victoria crouched down slowly. She reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small gold button, not the same one, but just like it. Shiny, round, warm from her pocket. She held it out to Mia. Mia looked at it.
Then she looked up at Victoria's face. Pretty, Mia said softly. Victoria's face broke just for a second. Something behind her eyes cracked open and let the light in. Yeah, she whispered.
It is. She stood up and walked out into the grey morning without looking back. Elena stood in the doorway and watched her go, and she felt something complicated and surprising.
Not satisfaction, not relief, something closer to compassion. Here is the part of the story where I need you to stay with me, because this is not where it ends. In the weeks that followed, Julian did everything carefully.
He didn't rush. He didn't make grand announcements. He sat down with Elena, really sat down with her.
And they talked the way they had talked all those years ago in that corridor behind the main hall at the gala.
Honestly, carefully, like two people trying to rebuild something that had fallen apart before either of them understood what it was. He asked about every moment he had missed.
Elena told him about Mia's first word, Bun, naturally about the night. She ran a fever and Elena sat on the bathroom floor holding her for hours, about the way she laughed. That big, enormous laugh for such a small body when something surprised her.
Julian listened to every single word. He listened like a man who understood that what he was hearing was irreplaceable.
Like a man who knew he was being handed something rare and had learned, finally and painfully, how quickly rare things could disappear if you weren't paying attention. And then one evening, not long after everything had changed, something happened that neither of them had planned.
Mia climbed into Julian's lap. Just like that, no ceremony, no announcement. She simply walked across the living room with Bun under one arm, looked at the empty space beside him on the couch, and decided it wasn't where she wanted to sit. She climbed up. She settled herself.
She looked up at him with those enormous eyes, her grandmother's eyes, and held up the gold button. Pretty, she said. Julian looked down at her. Something in his face, something that had been closed and careful and controlled for longer than he could remember, opened completely. Yeah, he said softly, his voice not quite steady.
The prettiest thing I've ever seen. He put one arm very carefully around her small shoulders, and Mia leaned into him. Just leaned trustingly, completely, the way only children can trust without conditions, without memory of being hurt, without walls. Elena, standing in the doorway, pressed her hand over her mouth. She had spent years being invisible.
Years building a world out of small dignities and silent endurance and the daily exhausting work of keeping her daughter safe and loved in a world that didn't often make that easy.
And now she was standing in a warm house on an evening, watching her daughter lean against her father for the first time. The gold button sat in Mia's open palm, catching the light. The fullness of what Elena felt in that moment, the grief of the years lost, and the grace of what had been found was the kind of thing that doesn't have a name. It's just life.
Beautiful, complicated, utterly unpredictable life. Here is what this story reminds me of. The most important things are almost never announced. They don't arrive with ceremony or grandeur or spotlight finding them in the crowd.
They arrive like a small child in duck socks, holding out a gold button quietly, trustingly, completely. And the question they always ask without words, without knowing they're asking it, is simply this: do you see me?
Elena spent years hoping someone would see her. Mia spent her whole small life not yet knowing that the world might not always be safe.
And Julian spent years moving so fast that he almost missed the most important thing he had ever created: a scream in a hallway.
A dropped button on a marble floor. A child with her grandmother's eyes. That was all it took to change everything. So here's my question for you today.
And I want you to really sit with this one. Who in your life has been waiting quietly, patiently, without saying a word for you to finally stop and see them? Don't take too long to find out. If this story touched your heart, and I really hope it did, please give it a like right now.
It takes 1 second, and it means everything to this channel. Leave a comment below, and tell me what moment hit you the hardest. Was it Mia holding up the button? Was it Victoria crouching down at the door? Was it Elena watching from the hallway? I want to know.
And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button so you never miss a story like this one. There are more coming.
Stories that will make you feel, make you think, and remind you why it matters to pay attention to the quiet people in the room. I'll see you in the next one.